The city hummed beneath a curtain of gold light as dusk fell over the glass towers, reflecting a life built on ambition and fragile pride. Inside a penthouse high above the noise, laughter echoed, hollow, rehearsed, and slightly offbeat. The kind that tried to sound like happiness, but didn't quite reach the eyes. The air between them carried the weight of things unsaid, the fading warmth of something once genuine. A hand brushed against another, not with love, but with habit. Somewhere between the glint of champagne and the pulse of the skyline, a fracture widened, small, invisible, unstoppable. Tonight would mark the beginning of a slow undoing, where the chase for youth and adoration would quietly devour everything that was once whole. Morning arrived in muted shades of gray, filtering through half-drawn curtains that used to welcome sunlight without hesitation. The kitchen, once alive with shared laughter and the smell of coffee, felt like a museum of memories. Too quiet, too clean, too distant. The clock ticked with cruel rhythm as one seat stayed empty. The warmth on the other side of the table long vanished. A phone vibrated, its screen flashing with a name that brought both thrill and guilt, and the silence stretched like a thin wire ready to snap. Somewhere between duty and desire, the line blurred, and the choice that would unravel their lives had already been made. The office buzzed with movement, but his thoughts were miles away, trapped between regret and obsession. Numbers, meetings, deals. None of it mattered when her laughter echoed faintly from his memory, like a forbidden song. He told himself he deserved this. Youth, admiration, the reminder that he was still wanted. But beneath the illusion shimmered something hollow, a sense that he was feeding a hunger that would never end. As the city glimmered below, he didn't notice the storm forming quietly behind him, one that would soon sweep through everything he'd built. Evening bled into night, the air thick with the perfume of deception and wine. Laughter rose around him, clinking glasses punctuating the illusion of freedom. Across the table, eyes met his, sparkling, dangerous, alive. The world outside blurred into neon streaks, while inside, the pulse of temptation grew louder than reason. He didn't see loyalty fading behind him. He only saw the shimmer of what he wanted to believe was love. Somewhere, deep down, he knew he was trading something priceless for something that would never last. The house was darker than usual when he returned. No scent of dinner, no hum of soft music, only the quiet echo of a life left waiting. He moved through the hallway, footsteps hesitant, heart caught between guilt and justification. On the counter lay a note, few words written in neat, calm handwriting. The kind of calm that hides heartbreak too deep to show. Outside, thunder rolled distantly, as if the heavens themselves had chosen a side. He stood there, staring at the words that marked the end of something pure, realizing too late that the silence he once ignored had become permanent. The days that followed blurred into a haze of indulgence and denial. He told himself it was a new beginning, freedom wrapped in perfume and laughter, but deep inside, he could still feel the quiet ghost of the woman who once waited at home. Ava made him feel alive again, or at least, she knew how to make him believe he was. Her world was louder, brighter, filled with people who spoke in compliments and lived for attention. Every smile she gave him came with a price, though he didn't see it yet. To him, she was youth and escape. To her, he was opportunity wrapped in a tailored suit. The office had changed. It used to feel like his kingdom. Now it felt like her stage. She arrived often, dressed impeccably, smelling of roses and danger, turning heads, stealing the air from the room. His colleagues whispered, some with envy, others with pity. Daniel's disapproval lingered unspoken, heavy in his stare. But Michael, blinded by attention, dismissed it all. He saw only the surface, how her laughter filled the emptiness that success never could. Beneath that laughter, however, was the first quiet shifting of control. the slow exchange of power he didn't realize was happening. He began giving her things: jewelry, cards, keys, access. It felt like generosity, but really, it was surrender disguised as affection. Every gift became another thread binding him tighter. She smiled sweetly, whispered thanks, and stored her treasures not in drawers, but in strategies. Nights turned into parties, and mornings into excuses. He started arriving late to meetings, his mind tangled in her orbit. The world admired the glamorous couple, but behind every photograph was the slow erosion of identity. A man who had traded purpose for vanity and didn't yet know the cost. The more he gave, the more distant she became. Her affection turned mechanical, her attention drifting toward the next shiny distraction. Nights once filled with laughter now echoed with silence broken by her scrolling phone. He tried to reclaim her focus with gifts, trips, promises, but she was no longer impressed. The first cracks of regret began to show, faint but undeniable. Somewhere in that luxurious emptiness he realized he wasn't loved. He was being tolerated, managed, kept around for what he could provide. And though pride kept him quiet, the truth had already begun its quiet descent. When Claire's name appeared on his phone one evening, he let it ring until silence swallowed the sound. He couldn't face her. Not yet, not while pretending to be happy. But something in him stirred, a faint pulse of guilt wrapped in memory. Her voicemail played later that night, calm and kind, wishing him well. It hurt more than anger ever could. Ava lay beside him, asleep, or pretending to be, and the distance between them felt larger than oceans. He turned toward the ceiling, listening to the echo of his own choices, unaware that karma was already setting its trap. In the calm after destruction there was silence, not of loss, but of becoming. Claire no longer woke to the sound of his footsteps or the ache of waiting. Instead, she rose to sunlight that belonged only to her. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. No longer a wound, but a map toward freedom. She filled her days with small acts of living, watering plants, organizing her studio, walking without checking the clock. Each breath carried less of him and more of herself. She didn't know it yet, but the universe was already turning in her favor, patient and deliberate. Word of Michael's new life reached her through whispers. Photos on social feeds, mutual friends who didn't know whether to pity or envy. The images looked glossy, perfect, almost unreal. She studied them once, then closed her laptop. No anger, no bitterness, just clarity. She understood now that happiness built on betrayal always carries cracks, invisible until pressure finds them. She began focusing on her art again, pouring every emotion into color and canvas. While he chased illusions, she was quietly building something real. Herself. Meanwhile, the paradise Michael built began showing hairline fractures. Ava's charm flickered more often now, her laughter shorter, her patience thinner. The house felt emptier despite its size, filled with things but devoid of warmth. He began noticing her late nights, her secretive phone calls, the way she turned away when he entered the room. But denial is a powerful drug. He told himself it was stress, youth, independence, anything but deceit. The man who once controlled every deal now couldn't control his own home. And somewhere, deep within, a sliver of fear began to bloom. Claire's art began attracting attention. A small gallery downtown invited her to display her work, a modest invitation. But to her, it felt monumental. She walked the gallery's white halls and felt something stir that had been dormant for years. Purpose. She no longer needed validation from love or success. She had found meaning in creation. The ache of betrayal had transformed into quiet power, and that power carried its own beauty. Somewhere else in the city, the man who broke her heart was beginning to feel the echo of her strength, though he couldn't name it yet. That same night, Michael sat alone in his office, scrolling through his bank statements with a sinking heart. Large transfers he didn't authorize, New accounts he didn't remember opening, investments he hadn't approved. He called out for Ava, but her phone went unanswered. For the first time, the mask of control slipped entirely, and he saw himself not as the conqueror, but the conquered. The empire he built brick by brick was beginning to crumble. And the woman he'd trusted most was holding the match. The silence that followed was deafening. The sound of karma arriving unannounced. The distance between them had grown into a chasm no luxury could bridge. Ava's laughter now grated on his nerves, and Michael's silence was met with scorn. Nights turned into arguments whispered through clenched teeth, each word a blade. She accused him of mistrust. He accused her of secrets. And in truth, both were right. He began noticing details. Passwords changed, meetings unexplained, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't his. The life I'd traded everything for was cracking under its own weight. Still, he clung to denial, unwilling to admit that the fantasy he chased had become a nightmare dressed in silk. Michael began digging through records, old emails, and account logs, searching for logic in the chaos. The deeper he went, the more he uncovered. Forged signatures, unexplained withdrawals, property transfers. Each discovery struck like a hammer to the chest. He wanted to believe it wasn't her, that somehow there was an error. But the truth was written in her precision. Ava hadn't stumbled into his world, she'd planned it. And the cruelest part was realizing how willingly he'd handed her the keys. He had mistaken manipulation for devotion, and now his empire was quietly being dismantled by the very hands he adored. Ava no longer hid her disdain. When he confronted her, she laughed. A cold, knowing laugh that silenced him more effectively than any argument. She spoke of independence, of fairness, of how much she'd earned by being with him. He realized then that love had never been part of her vocabulary, only leverage. For the first time, he saw the predator behind the charm. And yet, even standing before betrayal itself, he couldn't bring himself to hate her fully. He hated himself more for being so desperate to feel desired that he destroyed the only person who ever truly loved him. The rumors started next. Investors pulling out, partners distancing themselves, whispers spreading through the corporate world. His image, once untouchable, began to crumble in headlines and hushed conversations. The same charm that once drew people in now seemed hollow. He watched his name sink beneath stories of scandal and mismanagement, not yet realizing that Ava was orchestrating it all behind closed doors. Every leak, every rumor traced back to her subtle hand. She wasn't just taking his wealth. She was erasing his reputation piece by piece, ensuring that when she vanished, nothing of him would be worth keeping. That night he came home to silence so deep, it felt alive. Her clothes were gone, so were the jewelry boxes, the watches, the safe. Even the artwork on the walls had vanished. He stood in the doorway, unable to move, surrounded by the echo of his own blindness. On the counter, a note in her elegant handwriting waited, short, final, merciless. No apology, no explanation. Just closure, wrapped in cruelty. In that moment, he felt the full weight of karma, not as punishment, but as revelation. The life he'd traded love for was never his to keep. It was always hers to take. Days passed in a haze of disbelief. He called her number until it was disconnected, checked her socials only to find them erased, filed reports that led nowhere. Every trace of Ava Monroe had vanished as though she never existed, except for the wreckage she left behind. Credit lines closed, business accounts drained, properties seized. He spoke to lawyers who avoided his eyes, employees who had already chosen their silence. The world that once applauded him now turned its back. For the first time in his life, Michael realized he wasn't the predator of his story. He was the prey, and karma had fangs sharper than he ever imagined. He found her name again, on an offshore account registered under a company that didn't exist a year ago. Each discovery was another layer of her brilliance, her cruelty. She had built a ghost empire from his assets, using his trust as currency. Every memory they shared replayed in his mind, not as affection, but as evidence. How easily she had known his weaknesses, how effortlessly she'd played her role. And somewhere between anger and awe, he almost respected her precision. Almost. But as his lawyer explained how irreversible the damage was, admiration turned to despair. There was no winning against someone who had studied your soul before stealing it. His company fell next. Partners withdrew. Contracts dissolved. The press swarmed like vultures, feasting on the scent of scandal. He stopped showing up to meetings, stopped answering calls. Daniel tried once more to reach him, offering help, but Michael had already surrendered to the spiral. Pride kept him from admitting the truth aloud, that he'd destroyed his empire for a woman who saw him as a stepping stone. Outside, the world moved on. Inside, he sat in silence, surrounded by echoes of his own ambition, wondering when admiration became addiction, and when addiction became ruin. Weeks later, Ava resurfaced, but not to him. She appeared in tabloids beside a new investor, her arm hooked around a man twice her age and 10 times his wealth. Her smile was unchanged, radiant, practiced, lethal. Michael watched from a diner TV, unshaven and forgotten, coffee gone cold in his hands. He didn't rage, he didn't curse. He just stared, realizing that this had never been about love or betrayal. It was about hunger. And while he had chased beauty to feel young again, she had chased him to build her power. The difference was that her hunger had been honest. His had not. When everything was gone, money, reputation, pride, what remained was silence. He sat in the empty shell of his penthouse, stripped bare by greed and time. For the first time, he saw the space for what it was. Not a home, but a monument to ego. He thought of Claire, not with guilt anymore, but gratitude. She had survived what he destroyed. She had chosen peace over poison. And as the city lights flickered far below, he whispered a quiet apology to the darkness. There would be no grand redemption, no reversal of fate. Only the humbling truth that karma doesn't punish, it educates. Karma doesn't always arrive in thunder. It sometimes whispers through headlines. One morning, Michael saw her face on every news channel, not in glamour, but in disgrace. Fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The same game she played with him now turned on another. Her empire had imploded. He stared at the television, numb, unsure whether to feel vindicated or sorrowful. The world that once adored her now devoured her, the same way it had devoured him. For the first time in years, he felt nothing. Just an odd sense of balance, as if the scales of the universe had quietly corrected themselves. The media tore her apart with the same precision she once used to manipulate him. Former partners turned witnesses, investors disowned her, and every secret she hid became public. Michael watched it unfold quietly, not out of revenge but curiosity. How quickly the world that worshipped beauty could turn against it. He saw her walking from a courthouse, still trying to hold her head high, and felt something strange. Empathy. She was no longer the villain in his story. She was just another soul devoured by greed. The difference was, she had never learned when to stop. Michael's name surfaced again in the news, this time as a victim, not an accomplice. It did little to restore his fortune, but something deeper began to heal. Strangers who once mocked him now offered pity. Daniel reached out again, inviting him for coffee. No strings attached. For the first time in years, Michael accepted. Their conversation was quiet, stripped of ego, grounded in humility. He spoke little of the past and less of Ava. Instead, he asked about Claire. He didn't say why, but his eyes softened when her name was spoken, like a man remembering sunlight after too long in shadow. Later that evening, he walked through the streets alone, no destination in mind. The city that once represented conquest now whispered humility. Neon lights reflected on wet pavement, and every reflection reminded him of who he used to be. A man chasing admiration instead of love. He paused before a small art gallery window, drawn by a painting that stopped his breath. It was a landscape, radiant and familiar. He recognized the brushwork instantly. Claire. The world shifted in that instant, not in sound or motion, but in clarity. Karma hadn't come to destroy him, it had come to guide him home. He entered the gallery hesitantly, unsure whether fate had offered him a second chance or just a glimpse of what he'd lost. Claire was there, speaking to a small crowd, graceful as ever, her voice calm and genuine. He watched from a distance, not wanting to intrude. But then she saw him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years of silence dissolved. No words were needed. The look said everything. Forgiveness, understanding. Closure. The universe had completed its circle, not in vengeance, but in mercy. And for the first time, Michael smiled. Not at what he had, but at what he'd finally learned to let go. Time moved differently after that night. There were no grand reconciliations, no tears, no promises, only a quiet understanding that life had corrected itself. Michael stopped searching for redemption and began living with gratitude. He volunteered at shelters, rebuilt small connections, and rediscovered the peace of routine. The chaos that once ruled him had been replaced by stillness. Every dawn felt like forgiveness whispered in light. Sometimes he still thought of Ava, not with bitterness, but with pity. For in the end, karma didn't destroy her. It simply showed her reflection too clearly, and he at last had learned to face his own. Oh, Claire's success grew steadily, not in wealth, but in serenity. Her art flourished because it carried truth, sorrow, resilience, grace. Collectors began to notice, but she stayed humble, her joy grounded in simplicity. When asked about her past, she never spoke of betrayal, only of growth. Her peace became contagious, her smile a quiet sermon on strength. Somewhere deep down, she knew the universe had balanced itself. She didn't need revenge, she had evolution. The woman who was once abandoned had become untouchable. Not by armor, but by wisdom. Ava's story ended in silence. After the trial, she disappeared from headlines, her beauty fading from public memory like perfume after a storm. No one knew where she went. Some said Europe, others prison, but in truth, she became irrelevant to the world she once controlled. The spotlight that had once adored her now belonged to another illusion, another face. Karma had not only taken her freedom, it had taken her audience. For someone who lived to be seen, invisibility was the cruelest sentence of all. One afternoon, Michael visited Claire's gallery again, not to see her, but to thank her in silence. She was surrounded by new students, guiding them with warmth and patience. He watched from across the room, knowing words would only cheapen the moment. Their paths had diverged, yet somehow led to the same destination. Peace. As he left, he looked once more at her artwork, waves rising and falling beneath a glowing horizon. It reminded him that every mistake, every heartbreak, every loss had been necessary. Some lessons, after all, must be earned the hard way. As dusk settled over the city, the world moved on, quietly, as it always does. Michael stood at the edge of the pier where he and Claire had once walked years ago, the sky burning with the last light of day. Waves rolled in steady rhythm, carrying the sound of peace. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, letting go of everything. Regret, pride, pain. The lesson had been cruel, but it had led him here, to humility, to truth, to balance. Somewhere behind the horizon, karma rested too, satisfied. For justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply exhales.